Dr. Thomas Sowell, author of Preferential Policies and International Perspective. Why do you need a book like this right now?
Well, some of the issues that have been fought over are now coming to a head, especially with the Civil Rights Act of 1990, so-called, up before Congress, and especially in the light of Supreme Court decisions of last year, which have been called a cutback in civil rights, but which in fact I think are a corrective to many of the things that have been going on. I'm really worried about the attempt to reverse the Ward's-Cove decision, because I think that's the first case where a company was being prosecuted not because of any act of discrimination against any individual, not even because their numbers of employees were less than the numbers of the group in the population, but because they had a larger proportion of non-whites in the lower levels than they had in the upper levels. And if that decision is reversed, that will mean that employers will have an incentive not to hire as many working-class minority people and to try to hire more elite position minority people.
What's the Ward's Cove decision?
Well, Ward's Cove was a Ward's Cove packing company in Seattle, ran a cannery up in, still does, in Alaska. They hired the permanent and higher level people in around where their headquarters are in Seattle, Pacific Northwest. And up in Alaska, since there was only seasonal work during the salmon season, they would hire local people for that. It makes sense. And they happened to be located where there are a number of Eskimos, and there was a union that had a lot of Filipinos in it. And the net result was they had a predominantly white permanent staff and a predominantly non-white set of cannery workers. And there were other there are always subsidiary issues involved, but by the time the case got to the Supreme Court, all those other issues had been shut down, so that there was no question of anybody being discriminated against in hiring, no individual being discriminated against in treatment on the job. All that had been shut down in the lower courts. Now all that was before the Supreme Court was that the statistics looked bad, that they had all these non-white cannery workers and all these, well, not all white, but predominantly white upper-level workers. And the idea was they were supposed to be convicted of discrimination on that basis. And the Supreme Court wouldn't buy it. And they voted 5-4 that they wouldn't. And now the act before Congress is going to make it possible to convict a company on that basis. Even before the Ward's Cove decision, I had heard from people who are knowledgeable about civil rights that attorneys were advising their employer clients, if you can't find black engineers or black accountants, then at least don't hire so many black janitors or assembly line workers, because it looks bad. And if they succeed, that means that it will hurt the people who most need a job, and it will benefit, if anyone, only a handful of people in elite positions.
You break your book up in several sections around some of your travels, and you focus on Sri Lanka and India and Nigeria and Malaysia and the United States. Did you go to all those places?
Not Sri Lanka and Nigeria, but to the India, Malaysia, also to other places that I mentioned in passing, Australia, New Zealand, Fiji. Israel also has some preferential policies. You can't, in school, you can't leave back a disproportionate number of Sephardic Jews as compared to Ashkenazic Jews. Otherwise, that's considered bad.
Are there differences with people and races, differences in talent, and intelligence, and all those things? Since you've been studying, have you noticed differences around the world? Well,
there are differences in skills, if that's what you mean. That is, Germans have been prominent in piano manufacturing around the world, in the Tsarist Russia or Australia or the United States and so on. Underlying differences, those I've argued against, genetic differences, and those I've argued against, but that's another whole issue that I really don't get into in the book.
Why do different parts of the society do better than others?
I would look at it differently. I would say, and especially in the United States, I would say, why would we expect different groups to do the same? I say especially the United States because there are very few indigenous Americans. Americans that come here from all over the world. And why would you ever expect that countries that had entirely different histories, located in entirely different climates, different geography, why would you expect those countries to develop exactly the same mix of skills to exactly the same degree so that people would arrive on these shores in such a way that they would be represented evenly across the board, especially since even in countries where most of the population is indigenous, you don't find it there. The Germans arrived here with piano-making skills, and therefore you shouldn't expect to find the Irish equally represented with Germans in the piano industry. So when you find Steinways and other German named pianos, you shouldn't expect to find O'Houlihan pianos to the same extent, and so on. Nowhere in the world do you find this evenness that people use as a norm. And I find it fascinating that they will hold up as a norm something that has never been seen on this planet and regard as an anomaly something that is seen in country after country.
What's your favorite book out of the 14?
Oh, A Conflict of Visions.
Why?
I think it's what is more mine than anything else, in the sense that it doesn't build upon any theory that anyone else has or anything that's already out there in the literature. And it's an attempt to explain why people reach different ideological positions from one another. How two people similarly informed, similarly well-meaning, will reach opposite conclusions, not just on a given issue, but on the whole range of issues. That if you were to take a resolution about military spending and take it to a pro-choice meeting and to a pro-life meeting, you would probably get a very different reading on it. Or if you took all sorts of other things wholly unrelated to the abortion question to those same two meetings, you would probably get entirely different readings on those other unrelated questions because their positions grow out of a certain vision of the world. And if you have that vision of the world, then certain things make perfect sense and certain other things make no sense at all.
You write a newspaper column?
Yes.
How often?
Once a week.
What's the impact of that?
I have no idea, except when I get letters from people. I don't even know in what papers it appears. I send it to the syndicate, and that's the syndicate's problem from there on. And they pay me a fixed amount, so there's no need for them to give me an accounting.
Over the last 10 years of our call-in shows, I'll bet you we've had 25 people call up and say, why don't you get Thomas Sowell on to talk about this issue? I've seen you once on television in my life on Meet the Press a couple years ago. This is the first time we've met, and it just leads me to the question of why have we not seen more of you? Have you avoided television? And if you have, for what reason?
Well, I guess it's a question of where your advantages lie. My advantages lie in writing the books. And in order to do the amount of work that I do, there are many other things I don't do. And unfortunately, there are very few people who take positions similar to mine. And if that viewpoint is to be heard at all, I'm going to have to be the one that does a lot of it. And therefore, I can't do a lot of other things. As regards television, there are many problems with television, not the least of which are those shows where they tape you for an hour and a half and put you on for 5 minutes with other people interspliced to say what they have to say. And I don't go for that format at all.
I want to read, it'll take me just a minute here to read this paragraph and ask you to explain it further. This is deep in the book, and when I read it, it kind of popped out, and I wanted to ask you what you meant by all this. Say, any fundamental re-examination of the assumptions behind preferential policies, that's the name of the book, and still more so, any resulting change of policies, can expect to encounter their vocal, bitter, and determined opposition, including inevitable charges of racism against outsiders, labels of traitor put on any members of their own group who disagree with them, who disagree publicly with them, and whatever other claims or charges seem likely to be politically effective. When you said labels of traitor put on any members of their own group who disagree publicly with them, were you talking about yourself?
Only as one among many. Randall Kennedy up at Harvard did a very fine article in the Harvard Law Review last June, for which he was denounced as an academic minstrel and other things because he was out of step. I mean, people who raise their heads will set off a search and destroy mission because people have a lot at stake and they're sitting on a house of cards. They have many assumptions which simply cannot be examined carefully because those assumptions will collapse and they'll fall from a very high position to a very low position. And they are not about to tolerate people questioning what they're saying.
Is there a way for you to put it in a nutshell about what people of, say, your own race say about you that they don't like what you say about
wait. I think one of the ways that the organized noisemakers have succeeded is saying that what they're saying is what their race is saying. My race is not saying that about me. Those particular individuals who are a small minority themselves within the black community, who have a vested interest in many of these programs, they are saying that. But when I checked out of my hotel this morning, you know, the black security guard came over and said, "Are you Sowell?" And I said, "Yes." And he shook my hand warmly, and he walked me the length of the corridor and talked about this and about that. And that's not at all an uncommon experience for me. So it's not Sowell versus blacks, it's the black intellectuals. And the black intellectuals are no more typical of the black population than white intellectuals are of the white population. But they have a very large vested interest in certain beliefs which underlie various programs from which they benefit enormously. And as I point out in the book, this is common around the world, that the elites benefit from preferential programs, even when those programs are in the name of the masses. The masses do not benefit. In the case of the current so-called Civil Rights Act, the masses are going to lose big if that law goes into effect.
Why?
Because employers will not want to hire as many blacks in the jobs for which most blacks will be applying, because those will not be jobs as rocket scientists or as doctors or any of those things. And therefore they'll want to hold down percentages down there to what they can do in the higher ranks, which is going to be much less. And so you're sacrificing the working class blacks for the benefit of the professional elite.
How do the intellectual elite, both white and black, get to the position that they do in this country that you disagree with?
I mean, how do they have the influence they have?
Well, no, but what's their, from what your discussions over the years, what's their thought process that gets them there? Is it emotion or is it fact?
Emotion largely, but also a large amount of self-interest, increasingly self-interest. I think that if you went back, you know, into the 60s, you'd find people with different views like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X. But I think that both those men believed in what they said. Whereas today, you have people who are simply professional hustlers. And again, this is not peculiar to blacks or peculiar to the United States or even peculiar to racial issues. That organizations, typically, many movements are set off by idealistic people who want to promote some good for mankind or for some group. But as time goes by and as they succeed, they will be followed by people who can use these things for their own self-interest. And that's been the history of regulatory agencies in the government. It's been the history of, I think, of religions, that the first Christians who were being persecuted by the Roman Empire were not in it, you know, for what they could get, because all they were going to get is trouble. But once Christianity became the state religion, this became a very lucrative career for some people. And then you get an entirely different kind of person coming in at that point, and we can have an entirely different kind of movement.